Hey there, thank you so much for being here. Today I want to take you on a little bit of a journey backwards through some of the sweaters that I've made in the past, going all the way back to my very first sweater. Hey there, thank you so much for being here. My name is Felicia from Sweet Georgia, and this is Taking Back Friday. This is a space where we come every Friday and we talk about knitting and spinning and weaving and dyeing. I love the fiber arts, so I talk about that a lot. I also talk about how important it is to make time to make things. So this episode today was inspired by the fact that this past week on the School of Sweet Georgia, we launched a new course called Knitting Your First Sweater. Now this workshop is hosted by Tabitha Hedrick. She's our design director at Sweet Georgia, and so she leads you through all the steps of, figuring out how to knit your first sweater, how to read the pattern, how to knit your gauge swatch, how to choose materials, all of these kinds of things. She works through a very simple raglan sweater, which is done in a very traditional way. So you knit a front piece, you knit a back piece, you knit two sleeve pieces, and then she shows you how to assemble the whole thing into a raglan V-neck style pullover. So very, very simple, very fundamental things you need to know if you're going to knit your first sweater. And so seeing that workshop went up this past week, it inspired me to share with you some of the things that I have been making since I started knitting, really. So many of you guys will know my story where I started knitting when I was in grade school. I think I was around grade 4, grade 5 when I sent away for a pamphlet. It was like a black and white pamphlet from Peyton's or Patton's, and it was called Learning to Knit. I think you can still find it available for download online, but it basically just showed you how to do cast on, how to do knit stitch, how to do purl stitch, all of those kinds of things. And then I also had a kids knitting book, which I really loved, but I have no idea where it went to. It was very colorful. It showed me how to make leg warmers, mittens, and at the end of the book, like once you've graduated through all those little projects, you get to make a sweater. And so I've been dreaming about making this particular sweater for a long, long time. We lived in Toronto at the time, and so my mom would take me and my two brothers. She would walk us. We'd walk to the Kmart and, do our grocery shopping or whatever we needed to do at Kmart. And then I remember Kmart had like a little section where they sold knitting needles, like aluminum arrow knitting needles, and yarn. And I would always go and hang out in that section while my mom did the shopping. And I'd just hang out there for as long as she needed and just like dream about the needles, dream about like one day when I have my own money, I'm going to get those needles, or maybe I should get that size needles. I looked at all the yarn, all this kind of stuff. And somehow, some way, my mom decided to buy me the needles that I needed and the yarn that I needed to make this sweater. The yarn was acrylic, 100% acrylic. It was kind of like a lilac purple color. I'll show you what the sweater looks like. So these are photographs that are taken in Vancouver. Basically, in the summer between grade 7 and grade 8, my whole family moved from Toronto to Vancouver. And so during that time, I was at home by myself because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody in the neighborhood, and so I didn't really have any friends in town. So what I did was I focused a lot of my time and my energy on knitting. I spent a lot of time watching Mandarin soap operas. And so my Chinese got really good that summer, but I also, spent a lot of time knitting. And so I knit this sweater. And so you can see sort of like the Vancouver mountain background. We're at the beach, we're at Jericho Beach. Yeah, I love the sweater. This photo was taken in July, and I love this sweater so much that I'm wearing a full-sleeved, long-sleeved sweater in July. That's how much I like this sweater. I was so proud of this sweater that apparently I also wore it for photo day at school. I was so proud of this sweater. I love this sweater. From about grade 8, I started wearing this sweater. I kept it for so many years. I even wore it into university. You may or may not know that in university I did a lot of competitive ballroom dancing. I joined the UBC Dance Club and eventually became the president of the UBC Dance Club. Long time ago. And I remember we had an office at the time in the Student Union building that was designated for the UBC Dance Club. And I loved my sweater so much. It was so a part of my life that when I became president of the UBC Dance Club, we had to repaint the office, and I took my sweater and I color matched the sweater, and that became the color of the walls of the UBC Dance Club. And eventually they took on the colors like gold and purple, and the purple was in reference to my purple sweater. I really like that sweater, but I don't even know where it is anymore. I don't know where that sweater is anymore. But that sweater, again, was very, very similar to the sweater that Tabitha's teaching you to knit. It's basically knit in 4 pieces. Knit from the front, a back piece, 2 sleeves, sew them together. This one also happened to be a raglan. It just happened to be a crew neck sweater, so like a round neck sweater. The one that Tabitha is teaching in the workshop is a V-neck sweater. So that was my first sweater. And then, you know, going into university, it got very, very busy with lots of other things. I was doing a lot of dancing at the time, and I just didn't really have time to do any knitting. It wasn't until after I graduated university that I started to pick up knitting again. And I remember the first sweater that I made after I picked up knitting again was a pistachio green sweater made out of Rowan big wool. I bought this yarn at Urban Yarns in Point Grey in Vancouver. It was kind of like the one in my neighborhood, and I remember walking into that yarn store and just being so inspired by all the stuff that was available that wasn't available to me at Kmart when I was a kid. And there was like cashmere yarns, Debbie Bliss yarns, Rowan yarns that all just seemed so exciting, so fantastic, handmaiden, fleece artist, all of that stuff was so inspiring to me. So I bought the yarn to make a sweater. And I figured because it was big, fat, chunky wool that it would go really quickly and I would be successful in finishing it. But when I actually wore it, I looked a little bit like a marshmallow. But somehow I thought it was really cozy and I really liked it so much that I went back and I bought a second batch of yarn in the same yarn, that big wool yarn, in a different color to make a second one of the same pattern. After that, I was hooked on Rowan yarns. Like, I loved everything that they did. And so this is one of the projects that I'd made many, many years ago. I have not worn it really since, but it is also kind of that big wool feel. It's a very big, very chunky yarn, and it was twisted with ribbon. So the yarn was called Ribbon Twist. And there was another yarn that you're supposed to pair with it that is like puffy and fluffy, and so that became the trim. So this is one sweater that I made and I wore for some time. It's quite cozy, it's quite big, quite chunky. The reason why I chose all these chunky yarns was because I didn't feel confident that I could finish anything that was at a much finer gauge. And so just not believing in my own skills really prevented me from moving forward. You know, after a couple of years of feeling really inspired by Rowan and their designs, I ended up making this one, which is one of probably my first sort of color work projects. This one is called Electra, and it was available as a pullover and also as a vest version. So I made the vest version, and these were all yarns that I got from Rowan in the exact colors that were specified in the pattern. Like, I just followed everything to a T, except for the fact that this was supposed to be knit flat back and forth, but instead I chose to figure out a way to knit it in the round, and then I added some stitches for the armhole here and for the neck area and for the other armhole, and then I steeked it. So I basically machine sewed the edges here and then ended up cutting into the fabric that I'd created to open up for the armholes and for the neck, and then I did a 3 needle bind off for the top of the vest. So I just modified the pattern in order so I could knit it in the round and I didn't have to knit color work back and forth. I've just spent my whole life trying to avoid knitting color work back and forth flat. So this one turned out really well. I just followed all the instructions. And then I found my way into some other patterns. This one is, I quite like this, but it is basically a sweater that I made ages ago that is from Jaeger patterns, and the yarn I think was also a Jaeger brand yarn, but it was alpaca and wool all mixed together, and it's called like something tweed, alpaca tweed, something like that. It was really, really lovely. But and I made all these cables and everything. I blocked it out, the ribbing, flat. I stretched it out as I blocked it. And so now the ribbing is no longer stretchy. It no longer goes back and forth. It just kind of hangs like that. And it also wasn't the greatest color for me. I was having a baby pink moment. And I just thought that this color was great, but it's not great on me. And so I don't usually wear this sweater because A, it's alpaca and it's super hot and I can't be that hot all the time, but also because the color is not flattering on me. And so every time I put it on and I wear it for a little bit, I start to feel kind of about it. So that one is what it is. It is sort of a poor color choice, but I did a really, really good job of knitting the cables and doing a really good job knitting it. It's just a matter of the choice of materials and the choice of color. Again, on that alpaca kick, I knit this one, which is also a cardigan. It was meant to be very easy, meant to be very quick to knit because it was at a very large gauge. Again, I fell into the hole of knitting things that are at a very large gauge because I think that it will be faster, easier to finish, all of these kinds of things, but not necessarily flattering. This is one of those sweaters where I was telling you about that it's always slipping off your shoulders and it's really, really hard to keep on your shoulders. It is kind of like a top-down raglan style as well. Now, the reason why I don't wear this anywhere is because, I don't know if you can barely tell, you can kind of tell. You can tell that the ribbing here for this sleeve is shiny and slightly a different color. And that's because it came from a different dye lot than the rest of the skeins. So I had bought a whole bunch of yarn to make this sweater, which is baby alpaca and silk. And I didn't buy enough yarn, and when I went back to the store to buy more yarn, I had to get a different dye lot, and they don't match. And because they don't match, that's why there's this sort of this shift. There's like a break in the color, and so I was always feeling very self-conscious about wearing that, so I never wore it. And again, it's alpaca, so it's really, really super, super hot. So I show you all of these different sweaters from different times in my life, and how some of them have been okay, some of them have been really not so okay. I wanted to share these with you because I wanted you to see how, your first sweater or your second sweater or your fifth sweater or your seventh sweater may not be the perfect thing, may not be the thing that you absolutely love. It might be, but it might not be. And so I don't want you to get discouraged with the journey after having only done like one or two sweaters and feeling like, oh, this is not going to work for me. This is a very long learning process. There's lots and lots of things to learn. Things to learn not just about how to knit, how to purl, how to sew things together, how to, construct the sweater, but it's also about like figuring out where you're sitting with materials, what feels good for you, what kind of fibers work well with your body and your body temperature, all of these kinds of things. What kind of colors work really well with you? What kind of textures work well with you? What kind of projects you have that will, settle in with your attention span, with your confidence level. Lots and lots of ways of growing in this skill and in this craft. And so now I'm at the point where I'm making this yoke sweater color work, making it with a gradient in fingering weight. I absolutely love what's happening here. And I don't think that I would have jumped in right away to a project like this when I was first starting out knitting. I mean, I worked with things that were really, big and chunky because I didn't have that confidence level. So I just want to give you a little bit of encouragement that, don't be so hard on yourself and you can absolutely do it. Don't let your belief in your confidence level hold you back. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from making your first sweater or your 7th sweater or your 14th sweater. And each time you make a sweater, it's going to get better and better, and it's going to approach closer and closer and closer to the thing that you envision, the thing that you want. And I kind of feel like not giving yourself credit and not thinking that you can do something at a finer gauge, or not thinking that you can do something that's a little bit more complicated, those kinds of things actually hold you back from gaining that skill, from learning that skill. If I had sort of jumped into something like this a little bit earlier on, I might not have had the confidence to do it. But if I had done it earlier, I would be further along now, I think. So now that I have shared my first sweater story, I would love to hear about your first sweater. What is the first thing that you ever knit? Was it a success? Were you disappointed? Did you try again? How many times did you restart? Do you love it? Do you still have it? I feel like that very first sweater that you make is quite special. It's quite a special thing. That's why I have photos of it. This is why I remember it so vividly, because it was such an important thing for me to have created. I was very proud of the fact that I had accomplished making my very first sweater. And so I'm very excited that this is the content that we've released in the School of Sweet Georgia this week, is something that might get you to that place where you make your very first sweater. Even if you've already made sweaters before, Tabitha has lots and lots of things to share about knitting, and so hopefully you'll pop in and take a watch and see if you can learn something from Tabitha there as well. Thank you so much for being here today for this episode. If you like this episode, if you like listening to me talk about knitting, please do hit the like button, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please do hit subscribe. And I come here every Friday and we talk about knitting and spinning and weaving and dyeing. I like to talk about things to do with yarn. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next one. All right, bye for now.